Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Brewing the American Dream webinar presented in partnership with Axione Opportunity Fund and Samuel Adams. My name is Meredith Medlin, and I serve as the Director of Partnerships and Impact for Axione Opportunity Fund, a national nonprofit organization committed to providing affordable capital and business educational resources to entrepreneurs across the country. I'm so glad that you have joined us today for this conversation. During this really uncertain and difficult time for small businesses, we're so proud to support entrepreneurs through access to capital and educational engagements like this webinar. And we are so grateful to our national food and beverage partners at Sam Adams for their commitment to small business as well. As you might know, since 2008, Axione and Sam Adams have partnered on the Brewing the American Dream program. That program has the singular focus of supporting food and beverage business owners with capital, coaching, access to networks, and promotional opportunities to grow their businesses. This national philanthropic effort has provided over $47 million in loan capital, as well as best-in-class coaching completely free of charge to more than 11,000 small business owners. As you can see, today's webinar is just one more example of Sam Adams' unwavering commitment to small craft, food, and beverage entrepreneurs just like you all. We're so glad to have you joining us for this conversation. This webinar will address three core features of a strong brand: the concept or story behind the brand, the visual identity and design, and the experiential elements. As you guys know, some brands have really positive reputation or affinity to rely on, like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, but other brands find their strength in innovation or disruption in the industry, like Uber or Airbnb. It doesn't matter if you've been in business for years or if you're just starting out, building and cultivating that business brand is essential to your overall marketing, your advertising, your customer service, really all aspects of the business. So today we're going to discuss how to build and maintain a brand that feels authentic and is highly impactful for your customers. Before we begin, I just want to quickly go over a couple housekeeping items. First, you can view the presentation through the Zoom window if you've joined us by computer. You should locate the black toolbar that's part of the Zoom window, please, and find the chat function. We really encourage you to use that chat button to type in any questions you have throughout the presentation. I'm going to do a question and answer session with our panelists listed on the screen here using the questions that are typed into that chat window. So please type in anything you'd like to know and we'll get to your questions. Also, just letting you know we are recording today's webinar so you can refer back to this information later. I'm going to send you an email containing a link to that recording shortly after the webinar concludes today. In addition, once the conversation is over today, you'll be prompted to take a very short survey. Please give us just 2 minutes of your time to tell us what you think of today's webinar. We really appreciate it. And as you can see here, I'm really pleased to have these three speakers with us for the conversation today. Dave Wells, the brand storyteller for Samuel Adams. Greg Peasy is the creative director for Sam Adams. And our special guest speaker today is Alan Moy, who's the owner and founder of Vietnam Nam Restaurant, Catering Service, and Food Hall in Chicago. Alan's been part of the Axione and Brewing the American Dream family for years, and we're so pleased that he's here today to share his firsthand insights with us. So really glad to have all three of these folks joining the conversation today. And before we jump in, I also want to encourage you all to keep in touch with Brewing the American Dream through our social media channels. So stay in the loop with us so you can find out how we can help you in the future. Okay, let's get started with our first brand element, the concept and story. I'll hand it over to Dave Wells. Thanks so much for being here, Dave.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Can you see me okay? I'm frozen on my screen.
There I am. Now I can see you.
All right, well, I'm really happy to be here today. As Meredith said, my name is Dave Wells. I'm the brand storyteller at Sam Adams. And I think that brand storytelling, although it is an essential concept as a title, the brand storyteller is fairly new. It's a little bit of a combination of brand manager, copywriter. There's a visual element to brand storytelling for sure. And really brand storytelling is the combination of all those things, the management of your ideas, the concept, the words, and the visuals. Next slide, please. But what I want to focus on today is, as entrepreneurs, you're managing a ton of different things. And marketing and branding is a hugely important aspect of your business, but it may not be something that everybody's familiar with. So I want to break down brand storytelling from a high level. I don't want to get into taglines or details on brand positioning or any of the lovely marketing language and concepts that separates people who are entrepreneurs from people who market, because I think everybody can kind of do anything. And I want to give a window into a way for you to access brand storytelling that does away with all of that fancy stuff that we use with all the acronyms and stuff that I always forget what they mean anyway. And I want to keep it really, really simple. I want to go back to the campfire setting and keep it really, really human. And today I want to talk about the essential role of brand storytelling, which is stories, basically. Next slide. There are a lot of ways to think about brand storytelling, how you can approach it, how you actually execute it. But I want to give a really simple framework with this, this basic definition. Brand storytelling is the use of narratives to connect your brand to customers with a focus on linking what you stand for to the values you share with your customers. These are really important parts of brand storytelling. It's at the core of everything you do before you develop a position. This is the goal of why you're telling stories to begin with. Next slide, please. So let's break that down a little bit. Thousands of years ago, Aristotle broke down the key elements of story in the Poetics. It's for brand storytelling or just storytelling in general. It's something to go look up if you're not familiar with it. But a narrative is basically a story with plot, characters, conflict, goals, rising action. This is the middle of the movie. This is the middle of the book. There's a climax where things are resolved or they're not, or the hero wins or loses. And there's other categories of storytelling like theme, the denouement. So stories are really just the organization. A narrative is really just the organization of those story elements, your characters, your setting, your conflict. And I think a really nice window into brand storytelling is to think about that in terms of your business. So who are the characters, the brand, the people behind it? What is the backstory or the history? A lot of you probably have, it sucks I can't see you. I wish I could see you all right now because I'd love to see you. But you all have really interesting histories, I'm sure. You got where you are today through hard work and a lot of twists and turns, just like me, just like everybody. And that's part of your story as well. And then there's a setting. That's the industry. That's the city. If you're hyper local, it could be tech, food, whatever it is. That's your setting. And then, like any good character, you have a goal. You have a mission. Your mission is to produce the best baked goods for this region with a greater mission of empowering youth. I don't know. It could be anything. But you're going to encounter conflicts in your brand. There are problems that you're solving. Those are for your customers. There's no better way to grow CO2 plants that remove CO2 or something like that. I don't know. I'm making those all up. But put them in the context of your business. Those are the problems that you're solving, and they become the reason that you exist. And the story that you're telling is the rising action and all that. It's the campaigns you're doing. It's the website. All of those things are ways of overcoming the thing you want to solve. So connecting what you stand for is the essence of your brand. And that essence isn't really about a single product or a service or what you do to make money. It's that driving force. It's the plot element in your story that's behind your brand. And it's what really differentiates you from anybody who's doing something similar to what you do. When you bring in the values component of that description that I had on the previous page, these are the traits, the character traits. If you think of any show that you like, Walter White or Luke Skywalker or something, Yoda, he's really wise. Those are all character traits, and your brand has character traits. They might fall out of who you are, but those company values, for best or worse, that's who you are in action, and that's what your values become to your consumers. Next slide. So I want to bring up an example of values in storytelling. There are a lot of amazing brands out there. I'm not going to go through a bunch of brand examples necessarily, because I'm sure you're all doing that when you're thinking about the problems you want to solve and how you approach branding in general. But one I like to point out is Everlane, and they're a brand that makes clothing. They position themselves as radically transparent, and they make their clothes in the most equitable way possible. So they're using factories that have great labor practices. They're trying to produce clothing that doesn't fall apart after a year so that you have to buy more. And where they've really grown in the past 10 years or so is because their customers connect with their style. People who care about their style is basically everybody who's ever buying clothes that you'd think. Like you buying a shirt, you choose it for a specific reason. You think it's going to make you look cool, get a date, whatever. But they also care about fashion and reject the fast fashion world. And these people really flock to the brand. And when you go to Everlane's site, at the core of everything they do is this: we believe we can all make a difference. That's not necessarily about the color of the clothes they make or anything like that, but that's at the core of everything they do. And that's why people connect with them. Radically transparent is a great way to position who they are. And it starts to get at those values, and it starts to set up conflict as well. That's why I want to keep going back to the basic elements of story, because it's something we can all relate to when we're watching TV instead of thinking about it from a branding perspective always. Go to the next slide, please. So why does it matter? All of this matters because I'll go back to Aristotle for a second. It wasn't some marketer, it was Aristotle pointing out that all those elements of story, they're really just there to entertain, enlighten, and inform your audience. And in your case, it's your customers or your would-be customers. So the customer is the hero in the story that you're telling. You need to know what your brand story is so that you can insert the customer into it and not just dump out sale information or anything like that, but really making them the hero is going to be at the core of how you tell the narratives once you've locked in who you are. And you look at Gabe made it into this page here. If you look at the Hulk there on the right, Gabe, that's for you, buddy. So thinking of your customer as the hero in your brand storytelling, there are a couple of ways to start applying narratives. One way is with audience-led stories. This is one way to get you thinking about it. There's data-driven stories that can explain who you are, but I really want to call this one out because I think it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs, no matter what your business is, it's going to be where you lead. They're always for the audience, and with this approach, the story that you're telling becomes their story. It is their story. It's a clear plot to connect who they are with what you do and what you care about. And I got an example of that on the next page. Okay, can you bring that up? So this is an example from Google, and it's telling you a story about them, but it's hiding it in the story of a couple, and it's something we can all relate to. Gabe, would you mind playing that?
Hey Google, show me photos of me and Loretta. Remember, Loretta hated my mustache. Remember, Loretta loved going to Alaska and scallops. Show me photos from our anniversary. Remember, she always snorted when she laughed. Play our favorite movie. Remember, I'm the luckiest man in the world. Come on, boy.
Wow. Okay. So the takeaway there is that, what's important to people are the memories that they've built up over a lifetime. And what Google is asserting is that we can organize your data in a way to make those memories easier to access. That's their service, right? But what they're leading with is what's most important to you is most important to us. And that's it's not just an advertisement, it's a really great way to tell your brand story because they're leading with values. They're putting their customer at the center of the story, and they're at the same time explaining what they offer to the world. Here, next slide. So how do we get at what your brand is? I thought about structuring this entire talk around this element, but I think it's something that we kind of backing up to the story approach and just breaking down what that is and how we tell stories leads us where we want to be here. Because there are a million books out there about how to craft a tagline brand position. But let's go back to some essential questions now for you as you craft your brand story. On this page, I'd encourage you all, when you get this deck later, to take this and try and write long form on this. Write a page for each if you can, and really break down what these mean to you. What's your reason for being? That's your purpose. Luke Skywalker's got a purpose. Obi-Wan has a purpose there. What's your history? That's everything that's led to how you got to where you are today. Don't discard that stuff, because backstory is essential for the characters you're seeing on the page here. It's important to every character you've cared about, and it's important to brands too. Maybe you don't put that at the forefront, but it's definitely a part of where you're going, and don't neglect it. Who are your main characters? Is that going to be team members that you can highlight? Is it you as a single sole proprietor? Are you the core center of your brand if you were to put a face to it? What's your mission, your main goal? Is it to save the rainforest? Is it like Everlane, to make sure that you're making, that you produce clothes where the people who make them don't go broke just to produce them? And then think about how your offers are also your skills, your special superpowers. I like to think of them. And when we think of Sam Adams and we think of what you offer others, we often think about, we offer something of real quality that is a special moment that's something two people can share. That's, it's a little different than thinking of it in terms of we offer beer and beer is fun. So writing about that for yourself, I think would be a really useful exercise. And then write about how you do it differently and what those superpowers are. I put Luke Skywalker on here, not because I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but because like he unearths the superpowers that he has. And I think you all definitely have superpowers. Your superpowers might be baking. Your superpowers might be your unique voice, your unique perspective, but you'll find them and just believe in them. And then be honest about where your strengths and weaknesses, so that as you tell your brand story, your strengths and your weaknesses make you really, really human. But if you're a baker who's not necessarily interested in politics, maybe making political statements in your marketing to try and align with your customers' values isn't the best way to do it. Maybe if you can connect to them on another level through sports. Those are, I'd call those out as weaknesses. If you don't know or are particularly interested in something, don't build it into your brand just because you think it'll connect with consumers. I would say let it fall out of who you are and who your brand is really organically. Next slide. So just get back to Aristotle for a second. Now let's think about how you write your story for the audience. You have a character, those are your customers. They have a problem. They're hungry, they're lonely, whatever it is that you're trying to solve. They meet a guide on this journey that is you and your brand is going to lead them somewhere. You're going to give them a plan, and this is where your mission comes in. And you're going to usher them through their customer journey until you lead them to a call to adventure, which is follow us, order food from us, try this free trial, volunteer, let's make a better community. You're meeting them, you're solving their problem, you're showing them a path, and then you're giving them specifically what they can do to take action in their own life to solve their own problem, which you're facilitating the solution there. Good, next slide, please. So I'd just say, think about the story that you want to tell as you do the exercises on those other pages. And think about the association that you make with brands, especially brands like these. It's not only about the product that they make, it's about the values they have. REI is focused on getting outside and being part of the environment, caring about it. These brands offer something that puts you at the center of their story. I would doubt that you think of any of these brands without thinking about how they affect you, and your brand should do the same for others. And your brand is really your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And it's important to really think through what you want them saying. That's it.
All right, thanks so much, Dave, for walking us through that. And now we'll turn to Greg for the sort of other half of this really essential brand equation, the visual identity that integrates and interplays and really bolsters the story itself. Thanks, Greg.
Cool, thank you. Hey everyone, glad to be here. Thanks, Dave. What a great setup. Still drying my eyes from that Google ad, so thanks for that. But today, what I like to talk about is a quick overview of visual ID. It's basically the facade, if you will, of that story stuff that Dave was just speaking about. What we'll do is talk a bit about it and see how a good, solid visual ID can help your business and actually be an asset that's consistent and great for you to maintain your business. Next slide. So I will preface, I may bring up some geeky technical design terms that you may or may not be familiar with, but trust me, getting what a visual ID is and how to build one is actually really simplistic once you start the process. I'm hoping this overview will hopefully give you some insight and some ideas on how to build and manage your brand from a visual perspective. So I will go through what exactly is a visual ID, such as brand language, cohesive elements, the benefits of a visual ID, and then of course the cost versus perception and how this stuff actually works. We'll also look at components, which are super important. So like logos and word mark, typography, colors, and then of course visuals, which is always the fun stuff. And then how do we build this stuff? How do we put it all together? We'll talk about getting started, how to unify a visual identity, and then of course a brand strategy tie-in, or your story tie-in. And then we'll touch base a little bit on resources on how you can help your journey. Next slide. So what exactly is a visual identity? Well, it's a fancy term for branding and how you look in the space that you advertise with, how you go to market, what your storefront looks like, and even the products you make. So basically with branding and visual ID, what you see is kind of what you get. It's at least how potential customers can actually view you as a brand. Also, visual identity is how you can shape the perception of your brand and your company. And you want to create really important and accurate perceptions of these visual elements of your brand. Especially with, say, key visuals and art, it's really important that these forms of communication, that they speak on an emotional level and garner a reaction from your viewers and your customers. So it's basically your visual language. It's made up of logos, the graphics, typography, and colors. Can also include physical assets, which are super important because essentially that's the product that you're putting out into the world. And it directly represents the personality and the persona and the motion that you want your customers to feel, or the message that you want to convey. Next slide. So what I did was I put together a really cool mood board, an image board from an amazing brand called Samuel Adams. I know a little bit about them, so I figured it would be a great example to kind of show you how when visual elements come together, you can actually see what works almost instantaneously. It's like being consistent, being simple, and of course, being true to the brand, being true to that persona that the brand is at its heart. Visual identity works in a cohesive fashion with the persona and the perceptions that you want your customers to associate with your brand. So taking a look at this image board, you see product, you see photography, you see movement, you see the reaction of customers. They're happy, they love the beer, they want more to drink. It's one of those things that you just kind of feel more so than consciously make a decision about it. And of course, when you taste a product, whether it's a baked good or a beer, that has something to do with it too. But basically what we're doing is we're really trying to connect on that visual level. So I know it sounds complex and I know it can almost be exhausting or daunting to think about. But when your core brand elements come into play, if they work really well like this, there's a remembrance that consumers can have. And then that's when they actually gravitate towards your product, because it's not just about the product per se that they consume. It's what you can represent that reflects in them. It's almost like that cool factor that people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves in a weird way. So if you think about brands you love, like iconic brands, chances are they all share one or two things in common. Authenticity, they're super clear. They have like this clarity of promise, like they know who they are and you know who they are, and they're consistent about it. There could be like even overarching philosophy for the brand, like say Nike is performance, Target is design for like many in the world, and then say Apple, and this might be a little bit old in terms of old school Apple, but there was a counterculture with the Apple brand that was, I carry an Apple product, I get it, the Windows world doesn't, so to speak. Next slide. So what are these components of a visual ID? Like, how do we take a brand, the story, and product and make it so it's digestible and cohesive? So it's basically using visual elements that creates that brand recognition. It really helps to develop a consistent and usable brand look and feel. It allows for guideline establishment. Like, you could take a one-pager and put your brand on that page, and people should be able to get it in the drop of a hat. And with that, form follows function. So once you establish a visual identity, you basically have a jumping off point for all the materials you create in the future, which makes designing or creating materials a lot easier in the future state. So what does that look like? I mean, it sounds really tangible and really large, but let's take a look at what they look like in the next slide. So obviously what we have is we start with logos. So logo in brand design speak, it's obviously the heart of your brand, what you're putting out into the world. And it usually is the establishment of a visual identity. It's a symbol for the brand. And even things like logos can actually convey an emotion. And the best thing to do when working with logos in terms of a development standpoint is keep it simple and keep it clean so you can scale it and reproduce it easily. I think that's one of the challenges with new logo design. If you're new to designing or just researching, that complexity can really throw a monkey wrench into how your logo could be shown out into the world. The same was true for color palettes. I mean, the most effective and simple color palettes out there in the world are extremely, extremely easy to get. We heard Coca-Cola earlier in the conversation. I mean, you think of Coke, you think of two colors, white and red. And it's repurposed throughout its entirety, and it's entirely an ownable brand asset. So color is really used to identify the attributes to a brand on some kind of even, subliminal level, and to garner emotional responses from viewers. And the more limited a color palette is, it could still be super effective, but it's wicked easy to maintain. Typefaces is a fun one because there's millions and bajillions of typefaces out there in the world and fonts you can choose from. But it's really important that you identify with your font selection that it ties back in with things like the color palette and your logos. It's super important. You want to choose letter forms that can integrate really well with logos. And even make sure the style sort of matches your brand. So if you think of brands that have, heavy block typefaces like Harley Davidson, or like lighter typefaces like Dove, their typefaces actually integrate well into their brand visual language. You also want to keep legibility in mind too. So in the digital world that we live in, with websites and phones, and then all of the places your typeface will be shown, you want to make sure that it's scalable to all of those platforms. Graphics is a big one too. So graphics can be, in context from a visual identity perspective, can be illustrative. It can be little design elements that are used across the brand, but not key visuals, like say photography is. You can apply those to your ownable assets. You can have these things made so that they just relate back to your brand and can be an ownable asset that you can use in your branding toolbox. Imagery is probably, at least from my perspective, one of the most important aspects of a visual identity. It's really how your brand comes to life, and it really is charged with emotion, especially in photography, obviously, and in video. It's relatable because viewers want to empathize with imagery. They connect with it. It's almost instantaneous. And it's really representative of the brand's personality. And it gives you the opportunity to show exactly who you are in an almost human form. I mean, it's even your opportunity to say like, hey, look, we're pretty damn cool, and this is what we do, and have your customers relate to that. Next slide. So how do we go about building this stuff? There's a ton of it, because once you have a Viz ID locked down, you can apply that to basically everything for your brand. Whether you're just starting out and you're starting from scratch, or you have something established, it's like, how do we get from point A to point B in a way that's, successful, that makes sense, and that really works for your brand? So you really have to define who you are, your identity. And you have one. You may not think you do, but I'm pretty certain that you have some kind of story element or identity within the work that you've done to constitute the baseline to creating what you look like going into the world. So you really want to consider, like, how do you want your customers to perceive you? What's that X factor with your brand and what you offer and how it can be obtained in a real relatable way. And usually it's that compelling story that does that. Familiarize yourself with design and visual communication. The internet's a beautiful thing. There's so many things that you can research out there that can really help you along. Again, just kind of keep things simple, keep it scalable. That's a really great piece of advice that I learned in Design 101. And it's true because it works. And then, of course, you want to find that balance of consistency versus contrast, meaning when you have the opportunity to kind of scale out from your visual ID, how does those assets, like say for an ad campaign, how does it tie back to your core brand? Next slide. So how do we do this? Well, we can plan, research, ideate, confirm, execute, and maintain. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's really sort of the core elements of developing a good or even revamping a decent visual ID. So it's really an essential way for your brand to tell the story and connect with consumers on emotionally charged and personally driven levels. Understanding your own identity is actually going to really help you on your visual journey from a branding perspective. And it's also the first step in developing critical components when you create for your particular business, whether it's store signage, some packaged goods, packaged baked goods, beer, what have you, wherever you have the opportunity to brand. It's an element, it's a physical attribute, an extension of your core company. So wherever your visual journey takes you, just follow these simple steps and you'll be adequately prepared for the journey. Starting with planning, just take everything you've ever created for your brand and do a simple, brand audit. Just go through everything, look at what's working for you, what's not working for you, where you think the brand should be. Do your research, like research your competition, research brands you love and brands that you don't love. See how they go to market in terms of what they're using for visual assets. And then ideate. And this is something you could do on your own. You could do with family and friends. You could do with design, students at local college levels. As long as you have someone to bounce off ideas, I found that collaboration is a huge, huge benefit in terms of building a visual ID. And then confirm where you need all the stuff to go. Prioritize, find out what has to be done first, and literally list out in bullet point fashion what you need done. And then after that phase, then you just have to execute against that. And there's a ton of ways you can do that. You don't have to be a designer or a brander to do this stuff and do it well. There are plenty of resources out there in the world to help you along. And it can be anywhere from a high level agency to, crowdfunding over the internet. There's definitely tools out there that can help you along the way. And then I think the biggest one and most important is maintain. I've heard in my career that, good design is never really done. You always have to revisit it at some point, and that's where the maintenance come in. It's just do, gut checks from time to time. Usually the 12-month marker is a good opportunity to do that. And it should just definitely help you at least kind of figure out how you want to go into the world from a visual perspective. And then on the last slide, I just listed out some creative resources. You can refer to the deck. And this is just really the beginning of what's available out there in the world. The internet's a powerful thing. It's easy to get inspired. I mean, Dave pulled down a Google ad that could make everybody cry at the drop of a hat. It kind of gets your mind thinking, introduces you to new things. So don't be bashful and just, Google the hell out of stuff when you're ready to put some stuff together. And that's about it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg, for talking us through that, and Dave as well. So now we are going to turn to the firsthand experience. I'm so pleased to have Alan Moy with us, who's the owner and founder of Vietnam Nam in Chicago with us. And I'm excited to talk with you because you have firsthand knowledge of what it's like to implement some of these things that Dave and Greg spoke about today. So thanks for being with us, Alan.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. So my first question for you is, how did you start conceptualizing of what Vietnam Nam was going to mean when you first started the business?
for sure. So like all of us here in this call in some way, shape, or form have tried to address a problem. I think Dave spoke to this earlier, right? Addressing a problem, creating a solution. Vietnam, we're in the category of fast casual dining. We're definitely more on the angle of a lot of the trends you see on modern ethnic dining. But for us, we wanted to kind of address the age-old problem of how do you make healthy food tasty and tasty food healthy. So having that focus was core to our mission. Integrating some of the personal elements for me. I'm a third generation restaurant owner, and it means everything to me to personally use this as a legacy path for the things that my grandparents and my parents sacrificed throughout my life and before me. And ultimately, as we ideated all this, we started in 2015, and we were just at the time out of a shared kitchen. We were doing festivals, events only, and we had an initial brand that spoke to the fresh, clean eating of Vietnamese food. I think when we really pivoted in 2016 to a rebrand, a year out from our eventual brick and mortar opening in Evanston, prior to all of our other new locations, we really wanted to formalize this. And if you think about what Greg shared about those slides with even from typeface to colors, visual identity, we took it to heart to essentially build our own version of what Greg showed you guys. So I really would encourage all of you guys on this webinar to spend the time formally to do it up front, because in so many ways, those files, collateral, decisions become so scalable. And so for us, it was important that we used Kelly green for our main color. We had a clean typeface. If you look at brands like Starbucks and McDonald's, it's not hard to read those fonts. And they've really narrowed down on very clear messaging and branding through their logos and word marks and brand marks. So for us, for how difficult it is to navigate the world of Asian food sometimes, and our focus on allergens and gluten and dietary needs, we wanted to make sure it was very simple and easy, so the experience was different for folks. And so trying to ideate this from the beginning was just figuring out the core beliefs that we wanted to feed all modern diners in all walks of life with all different dietary needs. We wanted to address the healthy and tasty kind of conundrum. I wanted to integrate the focus on community as well as my family's legacy into why we do this a little differently and a lot of TLC. So those are core pillars, and defining that off the bat was critical. And then, finding how to execute on that should be organic and easy. And I think Dave talked about that. That's me thinking about family and my mom's memory, or thinking about, what it is to ensure that customers have the option to get something both flavorful as well as nutritious for their dietary needs.
That's such an important piece of kind of every decision you make has an effect on the brand and vice versa, right? Like the brand identity affects those decisions as well, for sure. So my next question for you kind of plays right into that. You mentioned, opening your first brick and mortar and all these new locations you've had this year. As the business has grown and changed, have you made specific decisions to kind of evolve the brand with the business, or maybe the opposite, specific decisions to keep the brand how it has been, and the business decision flows through that?
Sure. So naturally, you always have to adapt, but I think it's so critical that we've always had a compass in terms of how we should grow and how we should scale. So having those core consistent community pillars in terms of how we utilize our business for good, having those core principles on always having to have gluten-free sauces, always making sure that we have as many vegan accommodations as possible, that we're using clean ingredients, that we're using local partners. I think that's been so helpful to have as a bellwether to know that when we grow, are we growing the right way, or are we growing based on what's made us successful? So Evanston being just a phenomenal community and environment where we have the university as a partner, we have such a local warm community. It's critical that we use that as that springboard and blueprint as we grow across Chicago, and now as far down in the west side of the city to all over the place in the city. It's been critical. So I'd like to say that we always adapt as the times adapt. Obviously, right now during the pandemic, there's plenty of ways that we adapt, but throughout everything that you see, take one look at our Instagram gallery, you're going to see a very similar theme of community and clean eating and local partners and just a celebration of people, really. So that's, I think, the key that I can always share with folks that's kept us consistent, even for my own sake. Just there's a million things that go through my mind every day. If I can't narrow that funnel down to understand where I need to go with the brand, I probably would be lost more often than not.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And then, so I want to turn to something that's very timely. It's, of course, on everybody's mind this year. you got a lot of competing priorities if you're trying to survive as a business owner during a global pandemic. So I'm wondering if you can share with us some of the ways that your brand messaging might have changed to adapt to this new insane reality that we're living in.
Yeah. And this is still getting crazier, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sitting here in Chicago with quite the headlines every day, and I think it goes without saying that our priority now on safety, both for our customers, our team members, and each other. But as it pertains to the brand, I think what we've done is we've kind of amplified what we've typically done in the past, but more than ever, I mean, there's such a level-setting nature to the pandemic. It's not equal for everybody's experience by any means, but I think we have more of a shared common bond. I mean, I think all five of us here as hosts are sitting in our either private residences or somewhere that's not our typical office or my kitchen. Me being in front of some family photos and just being here in my apartment is indicative of, I think, an extra emphasis that I think we're all very interested in is understanding how we can keep our humanity, keep our connection and connectivity with one another. So I think our conscious efforts have been to go one step further to show that our brand is not just a logo. It's not just a business. It's certainly a community story. During the pandemic, we've done anything from summer roll making classes to how to build a banh mi burger kit to just showing folks imageries of our teams, our kitchens, a little bit more, because I think if we're ever going to get through this, the natural saying goes that we have to do this together. And I think that's not just a message, it's what our reality is so much these days. And so you'll see a lot more imagery in our stories, to our gallery photos, to posts, different messaging that we are really more one with the community than ever, and that's something that we really believe in top down. So I think that's something that we've made a conscious effort to really invite people into our homes like we are now.
Yeah, be much more sort of authentic, kind of everything's on the table because we're all going through this together, for sure. Okay. Well, I'm going to invite the audience to type in any questions that you guys have for any of our panelists. Invite Dave and Greg to come back on and we can take some questions. But as those come in, I wanted to, Alan, ask you one last question. If you could go back, a few years ago when Vietnam Nam was just starting, or it was even just an idea for you, if you could go back and give yourself any advice about the brand building process specifically, what advice would you share?
Yeah, this one's always an awesome question, because I think it really invites yourself to really be reflective on using the past, as channel as possible. I don't think that we would ever regret any decisions we've made. I think we always lead with heart and head equally. But I think as we reflect on just thinking about even now as we're challenged so often, I think there are moments where we could say, if we could have done more of this. I think it often ties into more the interactive side of our marketing and our branding. We are in food, so naturally we're very experiential. We've always been very connected with our community, but I think in terms of just activations and pulling people into the story even more so. And I mean that because as we're now disconnected more than ever, having additional touch points with customers, with engagements, and I do say that could also be digital in terms of more active engagements, but just having more activation kind of focused events with folks and some of the marketing and bringing the story that people typically read about more into the community. I think if we could go back in and I can give myself advice, put yourself out there always. I think that's the part that really gives you the ability to springboard and learn and engage directly with your customers. A lot of us can certainly sit behind all the amazing slides and photos and galleries, but it's mission critical to, I think, have looked back on it and then use this moving forward so that, gosh forbid, if not necessarily not a pandemic per se, but just you get another curveball with them that's an impediment to your business or an impediment to your growth. How do you take those customers who have been so core and connect with you and scale that even in the toughest times? And so I would challenge myself to run back and think about additional activations and brand front and center in front of folks. But I think net, I think the storytelling is always very people oriented. So hopefully it's just a matter of walking that walk now, where a lot of those inroads that we've made with folks and partners and nonprofits and customers alike continue to scale.
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer for sure. Well, thanks. All right. So we're going to do just a couple more questions. And we got questions ahead of time. A couple of people sent me some emails, and feel free to drop anything in the chat. We have just a couple of minutes here. And actually, Greg, I think this question is going to be a good one for you. We had somebody who has multiple sort of kinds of customers. So she's got a packaged product, and her example is she's in big box stores, and she's also in kind of gourmet boutique small shops with her packaged product. How can she create a brand that feels relevant and really resonates with two very different types of customers?
So that's actually a really great question. And I think it goes back to the simplicity of things. I think that if you're more simplistic in terms of how you approach the market, that's going to help from a visual perspective. I think from a branding perspective, I think your customer is still the same, whether if they're walking into a big box store or a boutique store. So there's always that challenge of how do you appease a mass retailer like a big box, but want to stay grounded at the local level. If you look at some of the brands that are recently in Target, like Harry's, have done a good job transitioning from the smaller world to the larger world, keeping their brand intact. Again, super simple, super clean, kind of resonates with that base. There is, however, the opportunity for line extensions. And this is where small businesses can really shine, because they may have the capacity to pivot and shift a lot easier than, say, a large mass producer of product. So they could actually create a line extension of their products that end up in a smaller boutique store with branding that's more relevant to that base. And it could be anything from even flipping, say, outer packaging from full high gloss finish that goes into big box to more organic forms like, cardboard corrugate into, a smaller store. So there's definitely some options that you can take a look at for sure.
Okay. Yeah, those are some great ideas and examples. Thanks, Greg. All right, I think we got time for one more question. We had a great one come into the chat. Alan, I'm wondering if you can help us, because I bet you have some firsthand experience doing this. So the question is there a way to kind of test out some logos or brand names in the kind of startup stage of a business? Oh, you're on mute.
Not anymore. There you go.
There we go.
Joyce, it looks like your question's about this. So as I mentioned earlier, back in 2015, we went through about a year with our old brand, and we had our clear goals we wanted to do with the new brand, but I certainly wouldn't tell you that every idea I had going to that rebranding process was totally accurate, the best, or the smartest even. So there is an absolute way you can do testing, and I'm sure Craig and Dave can maybe speak to this maybe at the more scalable level, but even then there's very sure similarities whether you're a small business or a big institution, and it's critical to use feedback directly. So for us, there was a couple different details. We're again trying to translate one of the lesser known Asian cuisines, let alone some terminology or names that you can't necessarily pronounce easily. The idea of saying pho isn't as simple to everybody. It looks like pho, right? So just putting a lot of printed materials in front of folks, using focus groups. We wanted to also create a brand identity around iconography, so like using our own icons for items, so it would show imagery and do us a service to allow folks to understand what the food was. If you look at Shake Shack, they have a lot of icons, and we kind of were inspired by that sort of path. And so we probably had no less than 4 to 5 different iterations with some creative folks that helped us with a lot of the icons. And so from a testing standpoint, I would work with someone on the very creative end to help you draft, and don't be afraid to do multiple drafts and to put that in front of focus groups. So we worked closely with Northwestern University, with a lot of the business school students there and the undergrad students. So formally we used focus groups. We worked with creative folks to do multi-iterations. I recognize as a small business owner and maybe a smaller business budget, there might be difficulties to be producing 500 t-shirts just to find out, and no one's pushing that. I think to me the key is taking meaningful opportunities in front of the focus groups and varying it up. So we purposely defined our core demographic as well, as we thought more younger, kind of potentially upper to higher affluent kind of demographic. But we also recognized that we were going to be in the mass market too. So we did a number of things where we would get in front of college students specifically, or if we felt that there was going to be a specific demographic, we also mixed it up to give ourselves a non, let's say, core demographic. And it taught us a lot about not just defining one customer in our head and thinking that would be the only way to succeed, because in the end, we certainly sell to all. So I challenge you both to have formal opportunities with focus groups, multiple iterations, as well as challenging yourself to test outside that, obviously, that demographic you imagine is good for your business.
Great. Thank you for sharing that experience. I think you're right. Some people in their business management feel a little underwater, overwhelmed, and so it's nice to know that it is possible to get some of that information, and there's people who can help for sure. Great. All right. Well, I think that is going to be all the time that we have for today for this conversation, but I really can't thank you all enough. Alan and Greg and Dave, before he had to hop, you guys are so helpful in thinking through these issues. I feel like this time of year is a really great time for business owners to kind of reset and think about how they want to build the brand going forward. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise. Really appreciate our audience who joined today to learn about this and discuss it with us. We'll be sending out this information to you after the fact so you can review it. And thanks for joining, and we will see you at our next webinar. Bye-bye, everybody.